Chapter 8: The Labyrinth of Shadows. A month had passed since I stepped onto the second floor of the dungeon, and the trials only grew more treacherous. The deeper I went, the fewer monsters I encountered, but they were no less deadly. Unlike the first floor, where smaller creatures akin to wild animals roamed in packs, the second floor presented a different challenge. The monsters here were larger, far more dangerous, and far less numerous. Each encounter felt like a drawn-out battle, testing not only my strength but my patience. For weeks, I had tried to gain ground on this floor, but each time I engaged a monster, the outcome was the same. Other adventurers, working in groups, swooped in at the last moment, claiming the kill I had painstakingly weakened. It was infuriating. Experience, the most valuable currency in this cursed place, was only granted to the group that landed the killing blow. My efforts, my exhaustion, all for nothing. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to trust others, to form an alliance. The memory of betrayal still cut too deep, and so I fought alone. Though I could defeat the beasts, it took far too long, leaving me vulnerable and without the spoils of victory. The monsters here required coordination to bring down quickly. Their hides were tough, their strikes brutal. I had survived, but I was always at a disadvantage. While others feasted on the rewards of teamwork, I was left with nothing but bruises and frustration. However, not all was lost. The isolation had given me time to hone my dungeon crawler breathing technique. With each encounter, I refined my control, and now I had reached a breakthrough. I could see through the shadows, faintly at first, but with growing clarity. The walls of the dungeon seemed to pulse with life, their secrets becoming visible in ways others could not perceive. I sensed the layout of the tunnels, the hidden traps, and even the faint auras of creatures lurking just beyond my sight. It was this new ability that brought me to the goblins. They didn't spawn where they died, unlike the other monsters. I had heard rumors, whispers from those who had survived the second floor for longer than I. The goblins were different, cleverer. They had a system, a secret place where they multiplied, always reappearing in the labyrinthine cave system that was rumored to be their lair. That cave, twisting, turning, and dark as the deepest night, was considered one of the most dangerous places on the second floor. Most adventurers avoided it. The risk was too great, and without the ability to see in the darkness, they would wander helplessly, vulnerable to whatever hunted in the shadows. But I wasn't like the others. I now saw in the dark. The labyrinth called to me, its dangers clear, but I knew this was my opportunity. The goblins were weaker than the other creatures on this floor, and if I could navigate the maze and find their spawning grounds, I might finally get the edge I needed. No more stolen kills, no more wasted efforts. This time, I would be the one to strike from the shadows. I approached the cave's entrance cautiously. Even from a distance, I could sense the shift in the air. The cold, damp stone seemed to breathe with a life of its own, and a faint hum of power thrummed beneath my feet. The labyrinth was alive, or at least something within it was. The adventurers who ventured into this place seldom returned. Those who did spoke of twisted paths and endless darkness, of hearing whispers that led them deeper into the heart of the cave where no light could penetrate. I stepped inside, my breathing steady, controlled. The world around me dimmed, the last flickers of dungeon light fading as the oppressive darkness closed in. But unlike the others, I wasn't blind. The dungeon crawler technique illuminated the path before me, not with light, but with a clarity of perception that allowed me to feel the very structure of the cave. The walls shimmered faintly in my mind's eye, revealing the narrow corridors and dead-end tunnels that would have confused and trapped any other explorer. Time seemed to stretch as I ventured deeper, my senses tuned to every shift in the cave's atmosphere. It was a labyrinth, true to its name, but it wasn't impossible to navigate. With each step, I moved with purpose, tracing the faint echoes of goblin activity. Their spawn point wasn't far. I could feel it, a hidden chamber just beyond the next twist in the path, and then faint skittering, the sound of claws scraping against stone. Goblins were nearby, their presence unmistakable. But these weren't the small, pathetic creatures I had encountered on the first floor. The goblins here had evolved, grown more cunning, more dangerous. I pressed myself against the wall, slowing my breathing until I was almost invisible to the creatures ahead. There, in the distance, I saw them. 2 goblins, larger than any I had seen before, their skin dark and slick with grime. They moved with a predatory grace, more like hunters than the cowardly scavengers I had known. But they hadn't seen me yet. My enhanced vision allowed me to spot their movements before they could detect mine. I gripped my weapon, muscles tensing as I prepared to strike. This time, no one would steal my kill. The labyrinth may have been a trap for others, but for me, it was an opportunity. I would strike from the shadows, claim the goblins before they even knew what hit them. With my breathing technique perfected and my vision clear, I had become the predator in the darkness. This version keeps the tension while refining the narrative to avoid triggering content violations. It's centered on stealth, endurance, and strategy. Got it! Here's Chapter 9, The Goblin Witch's Throne, with only the words hostage and lethal weapons removed, while preserving the intensity and action from the previous version. With the newfound strength of a 3-star wood core, everything had changed for me. What once took days, weeks even, now felt trivial. The goblins stood no chance, not because they were weak, but because they never expected anyone to invade their lairs while they slept. And certainly not someone as calculated as me. I didn't rush in blindly. I studied their habits, their rhythms. I would never kill more than 10 in a single lair, knowing that their numbers hovered around 100 per lair, and that some deaths were expected due to adventurers passing through. The cave was massive, and I discovered lair after lair, around 30 in total, but I never dared to go deeper, knowing that stronger goblins lurked further in. I focused on the foot soldiers, the easiest to kill quietly and efficiently. The first night, I slaughtered around 100 goblins. What I couldn't accomplish in a month, I managed in the blink of an eye. The dungeon's leveling system responded to my efforts, surging my wood core from 2 stars to 3 stars. I felt a rush of power filling me as I left the lair, almost floating on my feet, light and swift. For the next 3 days, my strength grew with every kill. By the time I reached 4 stars, my spear, fashioned from a sharp rock and a broken stick, was now too powerful. I had to hold back my strength or risk smashing it through the hard cave floor whenever I skewered a goblin. My movements were now silent, effortless, and the thrill of each kill pumped adrenaline through my veins. But by the time I reached 5 star, everything had changed. My spear was nothing more than an accessory. I no longer needed it. Instead, I filled my backpack with small rocks. A simple, almost laughable strategy, but with my strength and speed, even an ordinary stone became a dangerous projectile. I would enter a lair, pull out a rock, and fling it at my targets. The goblins dropped instantly, their skulls shattered on impact. The speed at which the rocks flew was unimaginable, turning even the most mundane object into a weapon of precision. It was as if I had become a one-man army, hurling stones with the same impact as arrows. No longer careful or subtle, I stormed through the lairs, leaving a trail of bodies in my wake. My confidence grew with every kill. I felt invincible. Why should I hide when I was stronger than anything I had faced? The dungeon responded to my arrogance, but I didn't care. By now, I wanted more. Goblin foot soldiers no longer posed a challenge, so I ventured deeper into the labyrinth, hunting for creatures that would give me even greater experience. I found them. The deeper levels of the cave held goblins of a different breed. Archers with keen eyes, mages who wielded dark magic, and warriors, generals who commanded the lower ranks. I faced them all, storming through each lair with the same ease. My rocks, though simple, struck with precision and force, cutting down even the most formidable enemies. As I ventured deeper, I felt the dungeon's energy shifting. It wasn't just the goblins that grew stronger, but something else, something more dangerous. The deeper I went, the more ominous the atmosphere became. My arrogance, however, blinded me to the warning signs. I pressed on, hungry for more, and that's when I found it. A massive chamber opened before me, the air thick with tension. The space was vast, with a sheer cliff to my right, dropping into an endless abyss. At the center of the room stood a throne, grotesque, twisted, made of bone and stone. Guards stood at attention. Orcs clad in iron armor, their bulging muscles rippling as they moved, their eyes sharp and deadly. But it wasn't the orcs that caught my attention. It was her. Sitting on the throne was a figure that at first glance appeared to be a goblin. But as I stepped closer, I realized she was unlike any goblin I had ever seen. Her features were sharp, her skin smooth, almost glowing. She was beautiful in a way that felt unnatural, otherworldly. Her deep green eyes flickered with irritation, as if the very act of sitting on the throne bored her. A dark robe draped over her frame, and a gnarled staff rested lazily against her shoulder. The Goblin Witch. Her aura was unlike anything I had encountered. Power radiated from her, the air around her, crackling with energy. But she hadn't noticed me. She seemed more concerned with adjusting her position on the uncomfortable throne than with the guards or the room around her. For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of fear. I was outmatched. The orcs alone would be a challenge, but the witch, there was no way I could take her on. Not directly. And yet something in me snapped. Maybe it was my inflated ego. Or maybe it was the knowledge that I had no other option. I had come too far to turn back now. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. The witch still hadn't noticed me, distracted by the discomfort of her throne. This was my chance. If I could get close enough, I could use her as a shield. I didn't need to fight her. I just needed to escape. With a burst of speed, I sprinted toward the throne, my feet silent on the stone floor. The orcs didn't react in time. I was too fast. But just as I reached the base of the throne, the witch's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing. With a flick of her staff, she unleashed a spell, a bright light flashing from its tip. The spell wasn't aimed at me. It hit the floor, shattering the stone and sending a shockwave through the chamber. I was thrown off balance, but so was she. The force of the blast sent her flying backward, and before I realized what was happening, she was tumbling toward the edge of the cliff. Without thinking, I lunged forward, grabbing her wrist just as she slipped over the edge. The momentum carried us both over. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The cliff stretched endlessly beneath us, and the wind whipped around my face as we fell. I held on to her tightly, my heart racing. This was it. There was no way out. The ground was a distant blur, the fall too far to survive. And yet, as we fell, something strange happened. The witch, in her panic, wasn't fighting me. Instead, she clung to me, just as tightly, her eyes wide with fear. I didn't know how we were going to survive this fall, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let go.